Hello, I'm Kathy Fagan, and welcome to our special presentation of Calabria, the Other Italy. My special guest today is Karen Haid. Karen is an accomplished musician and an award-winning author. Welcome, Karen, to Channel 95.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, you're quite welcome. Tell me, let's start first with your being a musician. I think that came first in your life. So how did you become interested in being a musician?
That's a good question. I started so young, I don't even really remember exactly why I started, but I started piano lessons at age 4. There was a piano in the house, and that's basically what I did. I have 3 sisters. We were practicing all the time, and it just becomes something, it's like brushing your teeth. I concentrated on the flute and the piano. Eventually, of course, I went to college as a music student, and eventually...
Which college?
Boston University.
Okay.
In Florida State, and I eventually got a doctorate in music.
Okay.
And I played many years in an orchestra, the Richmond Symphony, and in many other capacities as a professional musician, teaching in various schools.
And then you became interested in languages. How did that come about, from being this musician, playing all the musical instruments, and then transitioning to becoming interested in languages?
Well, perhaps when I was studying for my doctorate, I needed to have 3 languages, French, German, and Italian.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. And so I really began to focus particularly on Italian and German. And I did a lot of the studying on my own with books and tapes. Then after I finished, many years later, it was a little bit actually as a learning vacation. It's another way how I got into it even more, because I studied at intensive language schools where you live with a family and then you go to your classes in the morning and then do some sightseeing.
Okay. So that's really ironic, because that's exactly how my life went. I studied languages, and I lived in homes in Spain and Costa Rica and Mexico. And so we have a very similar experience. It's a wonderful experience, too. So,
it is. It's a way that you can really meet people and really get to know a culture. And so that's what happened also naturally in Italy.
Yeah. And what took you to Calabria?
Well, I thought to myself, what could I do to have a longer permanence in Italy, and naturally teaching English as an English speaker. And so I would look for a job over the internet, naturally. And initially I had some difficulty, as any American will, I can tell you, in Italy, trying to get working papers. But but anyway, in the long run, I ended up in Calabria, and in a little town called Locri on the Ionian Sea. I was there for 2 years, and I ended up in Reggio Calabria, which is the largest city.
Okay. My family's from that area.
Oh.
And so I was just so eager to read your book and learn more about Calabria, because I only got to spend 2 days there myself. So tell us a little bit about Calabria and some of your experiences there.
Okay. Well, it's a beautiful region.
Yes.
It's really known for its beauty. Of course, there are the mountains that run all through Italy, and they finish in Calabria. And so you have the beauty of the mountains, and then the proximity of the sea.
Yes.
And it has beautiful beaches. In particular, Tropea is one of the very well-known beaches. Scilla, but there are very many. So it's a really lovely place for vacationing. The food is excellent, as I'm sure you know, growing up in a household with that heritage. So, of course, that was wonderful to have that experience. And there's also a lot of art. There's a lot of history, particularly from the time of Greater Greece. And there are actually, in Reggio itself, there are these 2 statues, these 2 bronze statues from the Greek period. they're referred to as the bronzes of Riace, or the Riace bronzes, because they were discovered off the coast of Calabria in the water by some divers. And they are just spectacular works of art, 6'6" statues that are just world famous.
And now, where are they on display?
They're on display in the Archaeological Museum in Reggio.
In Reggio,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, which is right where Calabria kicks Sicily.
Yes.
Right there across
Right.
from Messina.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of Greek influence.
Well, there are many towns, or a number of towns, particularly in the south, where the language there, whether it's referred to as a language or the dialect, they speak a Greek language. So yes, and the Calabria also was known for its Greek scholars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so some of the scenery that you see when you go down there, like some of the sights that you see, can you tell us a little bit about what we would expect to see if we went down to Calabria?
Oh, well, in terms of some of the Greek heritage, there are some really spectacular churches.
Churches?
Yes, small Greek churches in the shape of the Greek cross, as opposed to the Roman Catholic. But of course, there are also beautiful Roman Catholic churches as well. There are also many castles, very picturesque castles.
In your book, you talked about like the different influences, like the Byzantine era and the Roman era. Is that all reflected in the castles and in the churches?
No, it is. It is. Yes, you see these wonderful little jewels of Byzantine churches that are earlier, naturally, 10th, 11th century, and then you see the larger Roman Catholic churches. So there, and then the Norman period was where most of the castles were begun. They were changed and expanded, etc., over the years. There was also set up a series of towers. And so every 12 kilometers along the coast, there's another tower. So that's also very picturesque.
The towers were for protection against the enemies, right?
Yes, for protection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I remember my father talking to me about a lot of like the religious events that they had, and the processions, he would call them. Tell us a little bit about some of that tradition and some of the things that went on.
Yeah. Yes, that is really when you go, if you get to go to.
They will go.
Calabria.
You will go to Calabria.
Yes, it was always good to schedule a trip when there is a procession, and every town has a procession of their patron saint. Often they're of the Madonna, and in Reggio, I got to see the procession a number of times, and it's really incredible seeing just the masses of people. Going down the street with carrying this incredibly heavy statue. Yeah.
Right. That's what my father described. It was this heavy, and all the men would just hoist this on their backs and walk through the streets.
Yes.
That kind of faith just impresses me. It really does.
It is impressive. Yeah.
And so I'd like to hear a little bit more about the food. I know that I grew up eating that kind of food, but I would just like for you to share some of the things that are special to the region of Calabria.
Okay. Well, what I would say, the first thing I have to mention is the bergamot.
Right. I never had heard, I haven't heard of that until I read your book.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, you might not have heard of it, but you basically, I'm sure, knew what it was.
I probably, tasted it.
You tasted it in Earl Grey tea.
Right.
So if anyone's ever had Earl Grey tea, the bergamot is what gives it the flavor. And it's a citrus fruit, a little bit larger than a lemon. And it actually, its principal use is really in perfume. It's in most fine perfumes. But it's the oil that comes off the skin.
The skin.
Yeah, the fruit itself is very bitter,
Yeah.
but the oil off the skin, it has just a lovely, delicate aroma, and it's used in perfume and in the tea, and it only really grows and produces fruit to a great extent in a small section of coastline in Calabria.
Yeah.
And so it's something really amazing, that 100-mile coastline.
That's
yeah,
surprising
yeah,
to me. You know, there's
yeah,
such a small region,
yeah,
and Calabria happens to be one of those regions where this fruit
Yeah.
thrives.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. And some of the other foods?
What else we were?
Just about the wonderful, like in your book, you describe going to different restaurants and the typical food that you would eat. And as I was reading the book, of course, it was so nostalgic for me because I ate this food growing up as a child,
Yeah. Well, of course, there's the pesce stocco, which I know that was you had mentioned before.
That really struck home with me.
Yeah, yeah. Which is basically a stockfish in English that was dried, Norwegian fish that was dried. But when you look at a region like Calabria and you see, oh, it's so close to the water, why wouldn't it be fresh? Why would you get this fish from Norway? Yeah. Because people lived in the mountains. Because
True.
there was the malaria on the coast and the fear from invasion, and so the people lived in the mountains.
That's
and
very
so
interesting.
they needed to have this this food that was preserved. And so now it's quite an art as to how to reconstitute and the dishes,
Right.
And it's quite special. There's also, of course, on the coast there's a history of the swordfish. There was that's also very important.
And bacala? Did they have
but-
the dried salted cod down in? Because I grew up eating bacala as well.
Yes, in Calabria it's more the pesce stocco.
Pesce stocco,
Yeah,
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 uh-huh.
yeah. I mean, they also, yeah. But the big tradition is the pesce stocco. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think Calabrian food is wonderful, but then, who am I to say?
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's also the peperoncino.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
something that's...
Yeah.
We don't get the fresh pepperoncino here, so on our table, we always have the little red pepper flakes, and that kind of substitute for the fresh pepperoncino.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they also use the dried in Calabria.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also mixed in oil. Often at tables there will be a little dish of the pepperoncino in oil, and there are some people who will spoon it on everything.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are people, if you don't like it, it's not a problem. But it is one of the specialties. Yeah.
Another thing you talked about, a tradition in Italy, is the passeggiata. Tell me a little bit about
Passeggiata.
that, because I used to see, when I was there, I used to watch it all the time, and there's this traditional thing they did every evening, like around sunset. Go
Yes,
ahead,
it's
describe
just
that.
taking a walk, basically. Taking a walk and meeting friends and family. And in many towns, they have pedestrian-only zones. And of course, that's the only place that you could do something like that. And young children, grown adults, elderly people, all go out for their walk.
Their walk.
Yeah.
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 I remember that so vividly, like in the smaller towns, like in Florence and Siena, that they would get out and walk around the piazza with the men with their hands behind their
Yes.
backs, just strolling.
Yeah, they have a certain elegance.
Another thing that I remember being in Italy each time I would go is the people are so well dressed. I don't know so much about Reggio. Reggio Calabria. I didn't spend a lot of time in Calabria, but when I would go like to Florence or Rome or that, I just felt like a real ragamuffin compared to the way the women dressed. And their scarves, and then just so elegant. They were just so elegant.
Well, Italians have a way with fashion.
Yes.
Yes, and they're not going to go out of the house just looking like, no. No, they're going to present themselves. They
Yeah.
want to always fare una bella figura.
Yeah.
They want to make a good impression. Yeah.
So with all of that experience, what made you write the book? What made you decide you wanted to write a book about Calabria?
Yes. Well, it might have been. I think there were a number of influences, but one of them was I went to many meetings of an Anglo-Italian club in Reggio, and they often spoke of what are now historic books about Calabria. There were 3 books that were very important for their time, and still are. But the last one, written by Norman Douglas, was written in 1915, or published in 1915.
Wow.
So I thought that, and they were by British authors also. And I thought, well, I would like to contribute, if I could,
Right.
with maybe a little bit of an American perspective,
Right.
with a comprehensive book about Calabria. There are several books where people have gone back to find their roots and more personal stories.
Right.
But while my book has a lot of anecdotes in it, my family was not from Calabria, and so it's more of an overview, an extended travel log.
Well, it's more than a travel log.
No,
I mean, you
yeah.
get into the travel part of
Yeah.
it, but you get into the personal touch. You get into how the people were and the things that they did in their everyday life and the food that they ate and so forth. And so it's just a lot more than a travel log. It's just so well done.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
try to. It's a study of the culture.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's
Yeah.
why it appeals to me so much. And I think
Glad.
it'll appeal to anybody at all. So, yeah. Do you think your musical training prepared you to write a book? The discipline in music transition to your writing a book?
Well, you used a word that actually fits me. I am very disciplined, and the practice and the study. But I also, while this is for the first book that I wrote, that is the type of book that a normal person would want to read. I did write a dissertation, which was quite technical,
Right.
musically technical. So I did have one book under my belt before this book.
Okay.
That and even though this book, people say, oh, Calabria, it's sort of a niche of a niche. The other book was a niche of a niche of a niche. But I hope through my book that more people will get to know Calabria.
Oh, I think so.
And
I think so.
yeah, and there's so many books about Tuscany and Rome, Florence, Venice, which of course are all wonderful places and so much to write about. But I wanted to do something different.
Yeah, well, you have done something different, and I think the next thing we have to do, Karen, is plan a trip to Calabria.
Yes.
But where does Karen go from here?
That's a good question. I ask myself that every morning.
Do you have another book in mind?
Nothing specific, but I have just a few ideas in my head, and I'm still in the thinking process.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it is something that we're going to be able to, in a couple of years, be able to go to a bookstore and pick up, right?
I hope so, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
No, I hope so. But I also do have my blog. I'd like to mention for
Yes,
people who
please.
either have liked the book or if they're have more interest in Calabria. I post twice a month articles about Calabria, also Italy, and so you might be interested in going to my blog.
Yeah, we'll certainly put up the blog, the website and the blog site. Yeah.
And Facebook page,
Oh, you
because
have-
of course, and the important thing also about the internet is the pictures, because the book, there are a handful of pictures in the book, but on the internet you can, and on my blog I can fill it with pictures, and so you can actually see.
Okay. Well, we'll
yeah.
get the word out there. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us
Thank you
today.
very
You
much.
did a great job on the book. I'm sure you're a great musician. I haven't heard you yet. I guess I
Thanks.
have to do that. But thank you so much, and we look forward to your next novel.
Thank you very much.